Okay, we are live.
We are live, comrade.
Hello and welcome. Good evening, everybody. Today we have a very distinguished panel comprising of the CPIM General Secretary, Comrade Sitaram Yechuri, another Politburo member and Chief Minister of Kerala, Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan, Comrade Prakash Karat, our Politburo member and former General Secretary, Comrade Manik Sarkar, former Chief Minister of Tripura and Politburo member, and of course myself. So today is the 75th anniversary day of the freedom struggle. We are entering the 75th year of the Indian independence. On this occasion, on our CPIM page, we have organized this discussion celebrating India's freedom struggle and identifying challenges today. For us, it's not only celebration. While commemorating the freedom struggle, paying tribute to our martyrs, great martyrs, after a long battle against British imperialists, we have got our freedom. And then even after independence, continue with this freedom, defend our independence. Many people have sacrificed their life. And today, throughout the world, the kind of US hegemony, the US imperialist is trying to bully. And among us, in this country also, there are people at the higher ups who are ready to accept this US hegemony or willingly trying to be the junior partner of the US imperialists. So protect our democracy and sovereignty as well as independence is very important. That's why you have to identify the challenges. At the same time, the great freedom fighters who have fought this independence, through the freedom struggle, we have got certain values, certain traditions, our golden traditions. We have to remember those because we'll draw lesson and strength from them. None of us can go back to our history, but we have to learn from the history. And there is an effort to destroy this history. Those who have never participated in the freedom struggle, those who have issued dictates to their followers and members not to participate in the freedom struggle, now they are in the helm of affairs in this country. In the name of the call given for New India, they're trying to present a distorted version of freedom struggle. At the same time, the values that we have got, the legacy of the freedom struggle, which is the founding principles of our constitution, that is being undermined. So naturally, our speakers will focus on various aspects of this situation, the challenges we face, and how to overcome. In that case, first of all, I think, without taking much time, I'll invite Comrade Sitaram Yechuri, General Secretary of the CPIM, as well as now these, as you consider it as a keynote address or the opening remarks, or particularly setting the tone of today's discussion. So over to Comrade Sitaram Yechuri. But I'll request you to also point out the role of the women in our freedom struggle, and now the way the women issues are now being subjugated, particularly today Prime Minister in his speech, independence speech, mentioned Matangini Hajra, the great freedom fighters, as Assam, belong to Assam. So that's how the distortion. You should know the history at least if you want to preserve this country and preserve the history of this. So not only Matangini Hajra or Pithilata Hajra, Karnuna, Aruna Asaf Ali, or our great Kalpana Joshi, and so many hosts of every corners from this country, they have participated. But same Prime Minister who came to Bengal for assembly election, in Midnapur he mentioned about great daughter of Midnapur, Matangini Hajra. That means whatever his speechwriter writes, he speaks, and then he forgets easily. And because Bhupen Hazarika is from Assam, I think that's the cause of this reason for this error. So he thought Hazarika is from Assam, so Hajra must be also from Assam. Sorry. This now over to Comrade Sitaram Yechuri.
Thank you, Comrade Salim. All the other members of the Politburo who are present here, Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan, Comrade Prakash Karat, Comrade Manik Sarkar, and all the other comrades and friends who have joined this webinar on India entering its 75th year of independence. And I have been asked, as you heard from the moderator today, Comrade Salim, to present a keynote or an overview of this 75 years and what the future holds for us. So since its time is limited, and I don't think there can be more than 20 minutes that we can take, so I'll try to be as brief as possible and trying to encapsulate some of the major points. The communists played a very crucial and a very important role in India's struggle for freedom. India's struggle for freedom was actually an epic people's struggle, as a result of which we achieved our independence. And in the process of achieving this independence, the idea of India, which is the inclusiveness of all the diversities that India has, immense diversities, uncomparable with any other country in the world, then and today. How to make that an inclusive country, and that was encapsulated in the conception of what is called the idea of India. Post-independence and the realization of this idea of India, the communists played a very important role and continue to play that role. Right back from its formation in 1920, in 21, Ahmedabad session of the AICC, on behalf of the Communist Party of India, two communists, Swami Kumarananda and Maulana Hasrat Mohani, moved the direction for full independence from the British. The first time ever this demand was articulated. Gandhiji didn't accept it then because he was still talking of the dominion status of Indians within the British Empire. Congress, finally AICC, accepted Purna Swaraj resolution only in Karachi in 1929. Nearly a decade earlier, the communists led this battle for complete freedom. And since then, in every single AICC session, those days the communists and the Communist Party used to participate in this AICC sessions. The communists used to present a manifesto on what should be the direction of the freedom movement. So there was a decisive intervention, not only through declarations and manifestos and what needs to be done through resolutions, but through people's movements. It was the Communist Party which organized at that point of time the entire struggle against the growing communal riots that were taking place in the country. The build-up to the partition of India that was happening. In that, the communists played a very important role in forming peace committees, in bringing people of all hues, religions, and differences together. And through those interventions and on people's issues, the communists contributed to strengthening the freedom struggle. The singular point that must be understood is, while the leadership of the freedom movement were mobilizing the exploited sections of the landlords, former princes, etc., and also the budding capitalists in the country into the freedom struggle, it was the Communist Party and the communists that brought together the exploited sections, that is the workers, the peasants, the agricultural labor, the bonded labor, and all the oppressed sections into the freedom struggle. And that has been the singular contribution, an important contribution of the communists. And this was happening in the decade of the 1920s, when there was a great churning that was taking place on what should be the conception of the character of independent India. 1920, the Communist Party was formed. 1925, the RSS is formed. Though the Congress was an older party, it was in 1928, under the Motilal Nehru Commission report, where the organizational structure of the Congress Party, which worked out the process of how this inclusiveness must be done, and that report came out. The discussion was on what should be the character of independent India. The Congress then said it cannot be anything but a secular democratic republic. The communists said yes, of course it has to be a secular democratic republic because of the entire diversities that we have. But secular democratic republic in itself is not the end. The political freedom that we achieve through independence, that political freedom must be translated into the economic freedom of every Indian, and that is possible only when we move towards socialism. So secular democratic republic, that moves towards the establishment of socialism was the communist vision. And the Congress vision's limitations, we pointed out, then if we do not move towards in this direction, then this very secular democratic republic will be vulnerable. That will not be sustainable. And the history since then has actually vindicated this resoundingly, that the pursuit of the capitalist path, the details you'll hear from our other speakers today, the pursuit of the capitalist path, how it undermined the secular democratic republic and this foundation, paving the way for the communal forces to take over. The third vision that appeared, as again the Congress and the communist vision, was the vision which argued that the character of independent India must be defined by the religious affiliation of its people. This had a twin expression. There were twin brothers. One was the Islamic State, the other was the Hindu Rashtra. The Muslim League championing the Islamic State, the RSS championing the Hindu Rashtra. These were the two contending factors, and when unfortunately the partition took place and the Islamic Republic became a reality, that Hindu Rashtra, that conception that India will not be a mirror image of Pakistan, of being a theocracy or a state defined by the religion of the majority of its people, but it will be a secular democratic republic. That was the what the freedom struggle upheld, and that is why the anger against Mahatma Gandhi then resulted in his assassination, because he was seen as somebody who was preventing the mirror image of Pakistan in India. Well, anyway, that is part of the. But the issues that were involved there was what? It is this battle between these three visions that today continues to define the contours of the political struggle and the political movements today in our country, in contemporary India. And it is these battles of visions. What should India be? A secular democratic republic, its consolidation, the realization of the inclusive India, or the idea of India, or the destruction of that, and in its place bringing about the fascistic Hindu Rashtra, as the CPIM party program defines the RSS agenda and its political project. Into that is the battle that is currently on. That is why when it was announced yesterday by the Prime Minister that 14th of August, Pakistan's Independence Day, will be observed to remember the horrors of partition. Yes, horrors of partition, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt it was the largest ever human transmigration that took place in any peacetime. Millions lost their lives, millions more were displaced, and it was a tragedy of an immense proportion. But India moved ahead of that tragedy by adopting a constitution and embracing the secular democratic republic with all its values and its promises and its guarantees. That movement today, if you want to take it back, the partition's genesis was the two-nation theory. Who was the first to advance the two-nation theory? Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, as the president of the Hindu Mahasabha. In 1938-39, he talks a term saying that in India there exist two nations, an Islamic nation and a Hindu nation. Jinnah picks it up 2 years later as the president of the Muslim League. And then, since then, both of them in tandem work together. And in the 1930s, you see the communal frenzy that really monster that comes into place, leading up to the time of our independence, which finally the British very, very successfully designed, ably, and aided the partition of India to suit also the imperialist interests. But yes, the partition horrors were there. But why the partition took place? What was the theoretical basis of the two-nation theory? And that must be understood today, because it was essentially, in 1923, it was Savarkar who coined this term Hindutva. And he said it has nothing to do with Hindu religion. It is a political project. And that political project, if you have to achieve, he gave a definition, saying that Matrubhumi and Pitrubhumi, fatherland and motherland, may be the same for many people. But the Punya Bhumi, the holy land, that defines who can stay in this land. And that is the concept of Hindutva. Muslims have their holy land in Makkah, Medina. The Christians have their holy land in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land, which is today the devastated Palestine. And since their Punya Bhumi is outside, they have no place in this country. The entire process of this communal virus, instead of the idea of India and inclusive India, this exclusive India or exclusivist India, this was something that was the product of this particular understanding. Eventually, was developed in 1939 by the RSS, his then chief Golwalkar, where he defined not only the program of how to achieve this fascistic Hindu Rashtra, but also gave the organizational structure. What we call the Sangh Parivar today is the result of that 1939 process that was initiated by Golwalkar when in his thesis that he would publish, then saying, we are our nationhood defined. And therefore, you'll find the RSS never having taken part in the Indian struggle for freedom. Many a times it collaborated. They continue a tirade saying that the communists have betrayed the freedom struggle. To put the record straight, we must understand that on the 50th anniversary of the Quit India movement, since Salim talked about mentioning women, it was the Quit India movement, it was Aruna Asaf Ali who hoisted the national flag here on the Quit India movement day. And there, on the 50th anniversary midnight session of the parliament, the then President of India, Shankar Dayal Sharma, in a speech he says, I quote, based on the dispatches of the British Home Department sent to London from here, he says, after large-scale, and quote, large-scale strikes in the mills of Kanpur, Jamshedpur, Ahmedabad, a dispatch from Delhi, 5th September 1942, to the Secretary of State in London, reported about Communist Party of India. The behavior of many of its members proves what has always been clear, namely, that it is composed of anti-British revolutionaries, unquote. An elected President of India in the Parliament on the 50th anniversary giving this information. Yet the RSS says that communists have betrayed. But what was the RSS role? The same Home Department. In a similar dispatch, it sends to London saying that during the Quit India movement, quote, the Sangh has scrupulously kept itself within the law and particularly has refrained from taking part in the disturbances that broke out in August 1942. So who are the collaborators? Who are the betrayers of the freedom struggle? And who are the ones that upheld the revolutionary content both of India's freedom and the future society of socialism? This has to be put at rest today. So the point is this post-assassination of Gandhi, when they were banned, RSS was banned by Sardar Patel. When in the communique, he says, the cult of violence unleashed by the Sangh has taken many lives, the most precious of them and the latest being that of Gandhiji himself. And after the ban, after many deceitful compromises, when the ban was lifted, the condition was put that RSS cannot take part in politics. Since then, there was search for a political arm. The first was the Janasangh, and later the Bharatiya Janata Party or the BJP today. The whole objective was to capture state power, using state power to destroy this secular democratic constitutional order, and in its place, bring in their conception of a rabidly intolerant, theocratic, fascistic Hindu or Hindutva Rashtra. That has been the objective, and this opportunity they got with complete majority for the first time, the BJP, when it won in 2014. Since then, what we are seeing now is, and that is the challenge of today. And Salim was saying not only in the past contributions, but what is the challenge of today? How it evolved down to this point. And that challenge of today is that since 2014, the whole objective is to destroy the secular democratic constitution and the constitutional order, and in its place, establish the fascistic Hindutva Rashtra. And that is why you see the the foundational pillars of our constitution: secular democracy, social justice, federalism, and economic sovereignty, not only self-reliance, but economic sovereignty of India. These four foundational principles are under severe assault today. The total loot of our national assets, large-scale privatization, attacks on the rights of the working class and the working people. The big farmer struggle that is going on today is a vindication and is a demonstration of the fact in which of the fact that they want to hand over not only India's assets in terms of public sector, mineral wealth, public utilities, etc., but also India's harvests and the wealth of our agriculture to big businesses, both international and national, to maximize their profits. And that loot of India is undermining India's economic sovereignty, in fact, destroying it. And through the process, of course, crony capitalism, their favorite corporates being favored, and the cutbacks they get for their own political funding from that. That is why it makes BJP a huge hostile money power in Indian politics today. And that is what is the result of this. Our center-state relations, federalism, is completely destroyed because this Hindu Rashtra or the fascistic Hindu Rashtra requires a unitary state. The federal state doesn't suit its objective. So to destroy the rights of the states is important for it to replace the secular democratic India with its Hindutva Rashtra. And that is why these attacks are mounting through their RSS appointed governors, through the interference of central agencies, undermining the rights of the state governments. And this assault on federalism is mounting. Social justice, the attacks on the Dalits, the attacks on women particularly, the attacks on Dalit girls who are gang raped and murdered brutally, the attacks on our tribals who are being denied their tribal rights, which after great struggle we had that law passed, Tribal Rights Act. All this today, and the horrendous attacks on women, and this entire trade in the girl child that is happening, particularly after the pandemic and closure of the academic institutions. This is actually intense. Social justice has become a distant objective. Social injustice and oppression is on the rise. So that fundamental pillar is being undermined. And then secular democracy, secularism, your sharpening of communal polarization, all these new laws that are bringing on population control, on love jihad, on control of cattle movement, and in their names targeting the minorities, targeting the Dalits, and in their name attacking and polarizing the society. And polarizing the society through a politics of hate, poison, and violence. And in that process, the bedrock of secularism is actually being destroyed. And then democracy, the assaults on the democratic rights of the people, the people who are continued to detain, languish in jail, not only in Jammu and Kashmir, but all over the country, under the UAPA, under sedition, under NSA, not only political leaders, but media personnel. Anybody who expresses dissent against this government is termed as anti-national and put behind bars using these draconian laws. The assaults on civil liberties, democratic rights, and human rights has never been so intense and so pervasive as we are seeing here today. So all these four fundamental pillars are being assaulted to undermine, but the constitutional order can be established. Yes, Salim, you come on. So my 20 minutes is over.
Huh? Yes. Yes.
Huh? Okay,
yeah,
I'll just
no
write it. Yeah. And this requires also the undermining of your parliamentary institutions, constitutional institutions. And beginning with the parliament, we've seen what happened to this monsoon session. The pressures on the judiciary, the pressures on the election commissions, the CBI, the ED, misusing them as the political arm of this government. All these are part of this larger agenda for creating a new India of Modi, which he said will be declared next year on 75th anniversary. That new India with the temple, Ram temple in Ayodhya, with a Modi Nagar and a Modi Mahal being built in Delhi, destroying Lutyens' Delhi. And to achieve this, finally, what is required is to control the minds of the people. And that is why the new education policy change your rationality with irrationality, replace reason with unreason, go back to obscurantism, go back to your Puranas as being the history of India, Ramayana and Mahabharata, and control the minds of the youngsters and the students through this new education policy. So this is the larger canvas today. That is the challenge. The challenge today is these forces who want to take India back into the darkness of the past. We are the ones who want to take India into the brightness of the future. This is the battle, and there the communists are determined. CPIM is determined that in this battle, we'll defeat the regressive forces and carry forward the advance of realizing the idea of India and consolidating our constitutional order, defending India. Save India today so that we can change it for the better tomorrow. That is the message that we have, and that is the message that we give to the country today on it when we enter our 75th year of our independence. Thank you, Salim. I think 23
Thank
minutes,
you.
of course.
Thank you, Comrade Sitaram. And you have rightly pointed out the history as well as the participation of the communists and those who have betrayed the cause. At the same time, how the present day's challenge is that it should be inclusionary and this constitutional scheme of things are sought to be destroyed, that we have to protect. At the same time, the larger game plan of this Sangh Parivar to destroy the pillars of the modern India. Now, I will invite Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan to speak, and he will focus on the legacy of the Indian freedom struggle for Indian independence. At the same time, while talking about legacy, the left alternative also, because the challenges that Comrade Sitaram actually pointed out. So, what is the left alternative so that we can carry forward the golden tradition of our freedom struggle? Over to Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan.
Sisters and brothers, on the 75th anniversary of our independence, it is my privilege to speak in this Facebook Live of the CPIM Central Committee. As we enter the 75th year of India's independence, it is imperative that we revisit the slogans that were raised during our anti-colonial struggle, the values that were championed by our freedom fighters, and the ideas that were incorporated into our constitution. To ascertain whether we have been able to do justice to them is essential to ensure that India moves ahead as a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. At the same time, as communists, it is our duty to recount how we have championed the cause of India's freedom and led numerous struggles that eventually led to the exit of colonial rulers on 15th August 1947. It is equally important to understand how the left forces in the country and the alternative programs they pursue help to keep alive the legacy of our glorious freedom struggle. It is our duty to recount our contributions because the role of communists in India's independence
What's happening, Salim?
is often deliberately undermined by our detractors who are bent on the distortion of history. Our nationalist movement, which transformed into a mass movement with people's participation, in the early 1920s had its roots in many scattered popular struggles of the past, which, however, could not attain a pan-India dimension. The early struggles prior to 29th century, like the first struggle for Indian independence in 1857, were noticed by Karl Marx in Das Kapital, in which he had characterized India as one of the most exploited colonial societies. The arrest and internment of Bal Gangadhar Tilak on charges of sedition was taken note of by Lenin, who commented that the working class strikes in protest against the arrest were an indicator of political maturity attained by the Indian working class. This amply shows that the leading lights of international communist movement keenly watched our anti-colonial struggle, contrary to the distorted versions. Communists were in the thick of the freedom struggle right from the formation of the Communist Party in 1920. It is pertinent that even the demand for Purna Swaraj was first made by communists in the Ahmedabad session of the Indian National Congress in 1921. The resolution for Purna Swaraj was proposed by communists years before the Indian National Congress accepted Purna Swaraj as its goal. A new constitution of the Communist Party was prepared in Bombay in 1927, which reiterated the demand for complete independence, universal suffrage, abolition of landlordism, nationalization of public utilities, etc. were also demanded. The various conspiracy cases, Peshawar, Kanpur and Meerut during the 1920s and 1930s were foisted by the colonial rulers on the communists. Working class protested across the country against these conspiracy cases. Organizations sprang up and strikes broke out in India's major industrial towns in the late 1920s. The Bombay textile strike in that period is well known. The active role of revolutionaries in the civil disobedience movement is a pointer to how the communists ignited the minds of India's young people by encouraging them to join our freedom struggle. It is a matter of record that most of those young revolutionaries ideologically converted themselves from their belief in individual acts of armed attacks on British to socialism and communism. From his writings, it is clear that Bhagat Singh considered himself a communist. When the Communist Party was banned, we worked through the Workers' and Peasants' Party from the early 1930s onwards. Many communist leaders joined the Indian National Congress in an attempt to radicalize the anti-colonial struggle. We know how the Congress Socialist Party was subsequently formed and how India's tallest communist leaders, including Comrades C.M.S. Sundaraiah and A.K.G., were leaders of the CSP in the second half of the 1930s. Armed with a new strategy and equipped with a more organized and disciplined party, the communists plunged into extensive work in different spheres, even as war clouds were gathering and militarization was underway across the world. A new upsurge in people's struggles shook the country, the communists playing a prominent part. Such class actions were followed by the formation of a number of mass organizations for workers, peasants, students, artists and writers under the leadership of the communists. In 1936, two important organizations were formed, one among the farmers, All India Kisan Sabha, AIKS, and another among the students, All India Students Federation, AISF. Both played a seminal role in extending the mass base of India's freedom struggle. As the Second World War broke out, communists were the first to organize anti-war demonstrations. Industrial strikes were organized in almost all Indian cities of the time: Bombay, Calcutta, Kanpur, Madras, and so on. These anti-war demonstrations were hugely popular and saw participation of hundreds of thousands of workers. After the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, communists supported the anti-fascist forces. It needs to be noted that our demand for complete independence was never diluted, not at any stage since the party's inception. The defeat of fascism at the international level, there were upsurges of popular struggles, and in the face of them, British imperialism entered into various compromises with the Congress and Muslim League. However, communists carried on with their role in supporting and organizing popular struggles. Communists stood in the forefront, leading many peasant struggles, linking them with our freedom struggles. Some such prominent struggles were in North Malabar in the 1940s, including Kayyur, the Tebaga movement in Bengal in 1943, the Telangana armed struggle which went on from 1946 to 1951, the Punnapravalar struggle of 1946 in Travancore, the revolt of the Warlis between 1945 and 1947 in Maharashtra, and the Surmavali struggle in Assam. The Royal Indian Navy Mutiny of 1946 was another important struggle which attracted masses towards the freedom movement. The strike, which started in Bombay, quickly spread to other naval bases and ships at sea, and sympathetic strikes were observed in Royal Air Force and the Indian Army. The mutiny was supported by ordinary people and the working classes of Bombay, who went on a solidarity strike. The working class of Bombay went on an industrial strike. These hugely successful strikes had been called by the Communist Party, even though both the Congress and the Muslim League denounced the strikes. Today, India is ruled by the BJP, which claims itself to be patriotic and nationalist. However, the organizations from which they draw their ideological foundations, the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS, do not have the heritage of anti-colonial struggle. India's independence from the British was never their goal. Instead, they collaborated and worked closely with the Raj and gained many favors. We need to remember that Golwalkar said that Hindus should not waste their energy fighting the British, but save it to fight internal enemies like Muslims, Christians, and communists. They were the ones who supported the two-nation theory of Jinnah that ultimately led to the partition of our country on religious lines. Even in 1947, when India attained independence, they did not alter their position. During the partition of our country, they were actively engaged in organizing communal riots, while communists worked hard to stop the riots and ensure peace. Here, we need to take note of the fact that imperialists made use of bourgeois nationalism to disrupt and united movements of the working class all over the world. In India too, they had to resort to such tactics as divide and rule, and by giving the communal question cardinal importance. Sidestepping the burning problems of the masses comprising of peasants and workers. As we are at 7.5 decades of independence, it can be said that India has made significant strides in the fields of science and technology. At the same time, the benefits have substantially bypassed significant sections of the population. Digital divide is one such example. As a democracy, we have been able to secure political equality through universal adult franchise, but economic equality is still a dream. The economic ideals of the freedom movement have largely remained unfulfilled, except in states where communists came to power, where they worked within the prevailing limitations to ensure people's economic well-being. This is especially so in the case of radical land reforms. As a modern society, we have been able to outlaw the dehumanizing caste discrimination and untouchability, but its vestiges are still quite strong in many of our villages. Communists always stood and stand for the rights of women and their equality. Communists are always in the forefront of the struggle for social reform and against all social evils. As we stand off the cusp of our platinum jubilee as an independent nation, India as a country needs to galvanize its resources so that public health core, which is a basic requirement in any modern society, is universally available at affordable rates. A country cannot have a realistic dream of emerging as a developed nation if a sizable section of its population is having to scurry so that their lives can be secured amidst a pandemic. As already mentioned, India's independence has been won through numerous struggles of various strands. The ideals of the freedom movement and the egalitarian values were abandoned by the Congress in the post-independence period, and it is the communists who took up the cause of the people and fought hard to uphold the values of the national movement. We have been in the forefront of defending civil liberties, democratic rights, and in the fight against assault on secularism, including steps to make religion the basis of citizenship through CAA 2019. Attack on minorities, Dalits and mob lynching. We are also in the forefront of defending federalism and rights of states and local governments. It is worth recalling the contributions of veteran communists like Comrade P. Sundaraiah, EMS, and others in making linguistic reorganization of states a reality. The efforts to break up states and take absolute control over union territories, as we saw in Jammu and Kashmir and Lakshadweep, and the ploy to brand political opponents as anti-national is a dangerous trend. On the fiscal front, states' rights are being infringed. Parties coming to power in states on the basis of the promises made to the people in their manifestos are having to accommodate an agenda that is not theirs because the state's financial powers are shrinking. GST has effectively put on an end to the financial autonomy of states. Further, encroachments through legislations without taking into account views of the states on subjects is in the concurrent and state list, be it education, agriculture, electricity, cooperatives go against the gain of our federal polity. This is where the left alternative assumes great significance. During this pandemic, Kerala, where our party and its allies are in power, has made notable interventions to protect the lives and livelihoods of our people. We were the first to write to the central government to implement free and universal vaccination. We wrote a letter to 11 non-BJP chief ministers and put forth the idea that states should together raise the demand that the center should procure and distribute vaccines to the states. We received a good response to this initiative, and this compelled the center to accede to the demand. In every instance in which our diversity has been attacked, our party and the government of Kerala, led by it, have taken the lead to defend our plural values. We took the lead in opposing the ban on cattle slaughter, in registering our opposition to the bifurcation of Jammu and Kashmir, in calling for an end to the attacks on Lakshadweep, and above all, in fighting a political and legal battle against the unconstitutional CAA. Kerala's Legislative Assembly has passed resolutions on all these instances. We have stood for the people's right to choose their partners and to eat the food of their preference. To us, preserving our diversity is essential. If our democracy is to sustain and flourish, Kerala government was also one of the first states to express its solidarity with the ongoing struggle of Kisans against the 3 farm laws enacted by the union government. We stand for the protection of the rights of the working class to organize, protest and strike. As India turns 75 as an independent nation, it is the duty of all of us who love the country and who bear the heritage of having fought for its independence to strive for adopting policies and programs to defend our democracy, secularism, economic sovereignty, and rights of the toiling masses. As communists, we have been doing it all along by playing a lead role and will continue to do so against all odds. Revolutionary greetings to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan. And as rightly pointed out, the history of the participation of the communists, the stalwarts, and the masses during the freedom struggle is rightly pointed out, and with the reference to the one of some of the tallest leaders emerged from the CSP, Congress Socialist Party movement in the south, including EMS, India, and how we were able to mobilize during the nascent days of communist movement, the farmers, the students, the youths, and workers in the forefront. At the same time, during and after the World War, as well as during freedom struggle and after freedom struggle, the role of the communists. Even to the present days, when the COVID-19 these challenges came, how Kerala played its role and Kerala was in the force, that was also pointed out. Now, I think Comrade Manik Sarkar, he will focus on the freedom, democracy, and social justice. Over to Comrade Manik Sarkar.
Yes, Comrade Chairman, other members of the Politburo who are actually taking part in this program, and our brothers and sisters, friends who are watching and listening us. On this occasion of Independence Day, it is a historic day, significant day for our country. I would like to convey my greetings to all of you. And at the outset, I pay my highest respect to the glorious memory of our martyrs who laid down their lives in the freedom struggle. The subject or issues have been identified for me to speak. Before me, two of our friends have delivered their speeches, and this way, that way, uh, the subject which is actually identified for me, they have touched. However, I shall have to speak on it, but I don't like to take time by in, just giving some introductory remark. Instead of that, I like to go straight to the subject. That is freedom. Where is freedom in India today? That is the basic point. Freedom does not mean only to hoist national tricolor on 15th of August and 26th of January. Freedom also does not mean to cast vote after every 5 years, either for parliament or for the state legislative assembly elections. Without food, shelter, clothing, education, healthcare, and most importantly, earnings for livelihood, how does a human being survive if all these minimum basic needs are not fulfilled by taking serious, honest, and sincere steps and care from the state power? Meaning of freedom bound to remain dream and only lip service. This is what is the state of affairs of freedom in India today, in the hands of RSS controlled BJP remaining in the helm of the state power. Real benefits of freedom being enjoyed and squeezed, I should say, by the monopoly capitalists, corporate houses, big landlords, tax evaders, black marketeers, illegal hoarders, according to the interest and whim of exploiters, the rulers of our country are implementing everything working overnight. From this, it is very, very clear that the real freedom in India today is for the exploiting classes of our country. Government at the center does not think and bother for the survivability of the common people of our country. Where is job for them? Where is food for them? Where is education facilities for their children? Where is healthcare facilities for them? No answer from the BJP government. Gap and inequities between the rich and the poor is widening every day. Common people are dying out of starvation and without treatment. That is more so during COVID pandemic period. Whole world is watching the state of affair of India. On the other hand, the handful of top exploiting families have been increasing their income and wealth, crossing all old records even during COVID pandemic period. From all this, in a nutshell, can it be said economic freedom for the common people of India, or it is mockery of freedom? This is the question being asked by the common people of our country nowadays. That's why I'm putting it in straight. Is there freedom of speech, freedom of thoughts, freedom of expression of mind, freedom of holding opposite views to the government policies, freedom of choosing religion and worship, freedom of taking part in democratic movement, and also and particularly freedom of press at all, then where does political freedom stand? This is a pertinent question. Struggle for independence of India had its dream and basic objectives of gaining political and economic freedom. But both these basic objectives remained unfulfilled because of class limitation of the earlier regime. Whatever the people could achieve through their ceaseless struggle from the unwilling grip of the earlier regime are now being destroyed in the hands of BJP government. This cannot be accepted too. These anti-people and pro-rich policies, both in political sphere and in the economic field, have to be changed. To get it done, people of India have to reorganize them to launch broadest possible united struggle throughout the country. In this struggle for achieving real freedom of common masses, working class, working people, peasantry, agricultural workers, unitedly have to take initiative and play a leading role. Democracy is under all-out virulent attacks in the hands of BJP government. Apparently, the ruling BJP party is wearing the mask of democracy. But in reality, BJP government in a fascistic manner butchering one after another institutions of democracy. Attack on democracy means attack on our constitution. The backbone of our democracy is the parliamentary democracy. It is being attacked like anything. Latest blatant example is that how they trample down the democratic method and norms of parliamentary system because the ruling party have number in their hands, but they do not use this number for the interest of the common and vast sections of masses of our country. They are utilizing this strength of number in their hands for the interest of the exploiting sections of the society. BJP government, by surpassing the brutal history of British rule in India, has been framing one after another black laws like NSA, UAPA, etc., etc. And they are using all these black laws to suppress dissenting voice of the people of India. That is the sorry state of affair. Independent role of election commission is being eroded in the interest of ruling BJP. Money power, muscle power, media power, who are controlling all these things, who have all this power in their hands, they can dwindle any result of election. That is what the country has been watching while the BJP government is running the show. BJP regime is active to disturb the independent role of judiciary. I don't like to mention many things in this regard. Only the Babri Masjid issue and the Ram Mandir thing, how that did happen, not the people of India, but the people of the world, surprisingly, they have watched all these things. That actually shamed us like anything. CBI and CAB and other institutions too are also losing their independent role and gradually identity, I should say. This is a very dangerous move. So, one party, dictatorial regime they want to introduce throughout the country and thinking of rewrite the history of our country and change the constitution of our country. This is a very dangerous move. Matter of social justice has been under severe regular attack in the BJP regime. The Dalits, tribals, minority communities are deprived of their legitimate rights and due share of facilities. Women, our mothers and sisters, are deprived of equal rights, respect, and honor. How they have been attacked in different parts of the country. People of India, not the people of India alone, the people all over the world, they have been watching. It is a shameful thing for our country. The dream of our independence struggle was this, that after attaining independence, the women will enjoy the equal status, equal rights. But that is not being implemented, rather denied like anything. This cannot be accepted too. Bhima Koragao incident has helped to open eyes of sensible people of different sections of society about the vindictive, inhuman, brutal face of BJP regime. The death of Sten Swami in jail custody is a matter of great shame for our country. Number of prominent personalities of our society have been booked under black laws to muzzle them for their taking stand in favor of socially weaker sections of our society. Through Amendment of Citizenship Act, BJP government is trying to deprive Muslim religious minority people of our country to get their legitimate right of Indian citizenship. Where is equal rights and equal justice? Rather, the socially and economically weaker section of our people are being further deprived of and cornered day by day under the BJP regime. They are being treated as second or third class citizen of India. This is a sorry state of affair. This has to be prevented. This has to be prevented. Freedom, democracy, and social justice are very much interlinked and interdependent. All these areas are under severe attack from the angle of class outlook of the ruling clique. This is undoubtedly class oppression engineered by the exploiters against the vast masses of our country, particularly the working class, working people, peasantry, agricultural worker, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBCs, minorities of different categories. They are being suppressed like anything. This is what is going on after 74 years of independence. Today we have entered the 75th year of independence. What we have gained, what we have got, that is the cardinal point people of our country have been actually raising and asking. So, in this situation, without changing this negative and destructive attitude and approach of the BJP regime, glory of freedom struggle cannot be restored and the objectives of freedom struggle cannot be fructified. Therefore, there is need to take vow to develop broadest possible united struggle, mobilizing left, democratic, and secular forces throughout the country with projection of practical and acceptable alternative to the common people of our country. With this, I conclude. Thank you all.
Thank you, Comrade Manik Shaka. You did justice the time as well as the topic. I must thank him because from the beginning, the Marxists, the communists, while participating in the freedom struggle and asking for the Purna Swaraj, they also brought in the factor of abolition of landlordism as well as abolition of caste repression. So, in the Indian Constitution, keeping in mind the promises made during the freedom struggle, it was promised to build a new India based on principles of equality and justice. The Gaya session of Congress, the communists demanded also the universal adult franchise, also the equal voting rights of women. At the same time, it's not only the political independency, but the freedom will ensure not only the liberty, equality, and fraternity as enshrined in the Constitution, but also it's the Constitution of India promised justice, social, economic, and political. And yet we have to achieve, and that's will be the pledge in the 75th day, Independence Day. Now, Comrade Prakash Karat and Comrade Prakash Karat need not don't need any introduction, as well as his topic also is the present day's challenge worldwide. At the same time, in this country also, what we are getting from the world capitalism, as well as the growing inequalities and the betrayal of the freedom struggle promises. His topic is capitalism, inequalities, and betrayal of the freedom struggle promises. Over to Comrade Prakash Karat.
Comrades and friends, I would like to greet all of you on the occasion of 75 years of independence. The independence struggle provided the modern concept of India, an India which would have political democracy and economic and social justice. It was these values of the freedom struggle that were reflected by and large in the Republican Constitution that we adopted in 1950. In this Constitution, the basic principles of secularism, democracy, national sovereignty, and social and economic justice were reflected. I would like to recall what the directive principles in the Constitution have stated regarding economic and social policies. The directive principles in the Constitution directs the state to promote the welfare of the people by serving, and I quote, a social order in which justice, social, economic, and political should inform all the institutions of the national life, unquote. Further, it says the state should strive, quote, to minimize inequalities in income, unquote. And then further, to see that, quote, control of the material resources of the community are so distributed as to subserve the common good. And finally, to ensure that the, quote, operation of the economic system does not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment, unquote. Now, these directive principles in the Constitution reflect what was the aspirations of the people during the freedom struggle. Some of these principles and values were also contained in the 1931 Karachi AICC resolution on fundamental rights and a national economic program. In that resolution, the freedom of citizens, the fundamental rights of citizens were spelled out. The right of association, the right of free expression, and so on. And the rights of women, equal rights for women. And the economic program was directed towards anti-landlordism, reduction of rent for the peasants, ensuring fair working hours for the workers, and equal rights for women. So all this was contained in the Karachi resolution. And this understanding is carried forward in these directive principles which I have just quoted. But 7.5 decades later, it is amply clear that the new Indian state and those who exercise the levers of power, successive governments, have ignored or violated these directive principles, every one of them. Instead of minimizing inequalities of income, we have seen the maximization of inequalities of income and wealth. Instead of ensuring that the institutions of the state are guided by the principles of social, economic, and political justice, what we have seen is the concentration of power in the hands of a privileged class or elite and the deprivation of social, economic, and political rights of the common people. And instead of the material resources of the community being distributed to subserve the common good, what we have seen is the material resources of the community, that is our country, being cornered and looted by a rapacious big bourgeoisie in collaboration with foreign capital. And the operation of the economic system should not lead, it says, result in the concentration of wealth and the means of production. The opposite has happened. Now, why has this betrayal of the promise of the freedom struggle and the direction which it gave of building a socially, economically just society with political democracy, why has it not only faltered, but now today we are at a stage where all these ideals or gains are being not only undermined, but reversed? For that, we have to see in class terms what happened at the time of independence and the new state power which was established in India. The ruling classes who took over the reins of power in India were the national bourgeoisie, but this bourgeoisie did not go forward towards completing the tasks of the democratic revolution. Some of those tasks were completed with the stage of the freedom struggle, but the political, economic, and social tasks of the democratic revolution, many of them remained unfulfilled. But this new ruling class which came into power decided that they must compromise with landlordism. The anti-feudal, anti-landlord struggle, which was part of the freedom struggle, anti-imperialist struggle, that was stopped, and the landlords as a class were incorporated or co-opted into the state power. And it is this compromise with landlordism which shaped the nature of our socio-economic development in the coming decades. Some reference was made earlier about how the left-led governments implemented land reforms. That was later in the 50s and 60s. But before that, the land reforms which were promised, they were not taken up and implemented seriously. Only cosmetic changes were made. Only some limited reforms from the top were initiated so that the semi-feudal landlords could be transformed or converted into capitalist landlords. And capitalist development, the whole nature of capitalist development in India, the path that was adopted was a superimposition of capitalism on the existing pre-capitalist relations. This had fateful consequences for the course of India's development. Because without land reform, without abolishing landlordism, it was not possible to emancipate the vast masses of the peasantry, provide them with the productive resources for improving their living standards, and also create the basis for a socially and economically just order of society. And this compromise with landlordism and the old pre-capitalist relations also prevented the breakup and the abolition of the old unequal social relations. Much has been said, and even the Constitution talks of abolishing untouchability and caste discrimination. But in reality, untouchability and the caste hierarchy and caste oppression continue side by side with capitalist exploitation. So the result of this path of capitalist development was that more and more such a development had to depend on support and help from international finance capital. Though in the early first 2 decades, what was known as the Nehruvian path, in which some effort was made to develop capitalism autonomously by building a public sector, by state intervention to regulate some certain economic relations, etc. Very soon, the nature of capitalist development was such that the concentration of capital and wealth developed. The big business houses which existed at the time of independence became bigger. And even in the 60s, it was clear that there are 20 big monopoly houses which controlled nearly 50% of the industrial assets of our country. So the growth of monopoly capital, the concentration of capital, the obverse side was the growth of inequality. that is, for the vast masses of the working people, there was no real breakthrough in eliminating their level of poverty that they were living in. And the compromise with the old pre-capitalist relations also meant that social conditions, the emancipation socially which was necessary for citizens to realize their full potential, that was also thwarted. Anyway, after 4.5 decades of this type of capitalist development, it reached a dead end. Because for industry to grow, for capital to develop, capitalism to develop, it requires a continuously expanding domestic home market. But the purchasing power of the people continued to stagnate, and finally the crisis was such that a stage was reached where, as we all know, in the beginning of the 1990s, we went to the new phase of capitalist development, which is the neoliberal phase of capitalist development, which was then a worldwide phenomenon. So what has happened since then? 3 decades of liberalization and neoliberal policies is that the concentration of capital has increased tremendously. The big business houses, the monopoly houses have grown exponentially, and their power has grown, and their impact on the political system or the grip on the political system has grown. This has proved to be very detrimental for democracy also, but I'm not going into that aspect now. What we have to understand is that the failure to complete the task of the democratic revolution and the capitalist path of development, the type of capitalist path of development, starting with the compromise with landlordism, has prevented the full potential of economic growth or development which will benefit all sections of the people. And therefore, now we are at a stage where you have, on the one hand, levels of obscene wealth. Some of the richest people in the world are Indians today. The number of billionaires is growing rapidly. In fact, just in the space of 1 year, during this pandemic, the period of economic crisis, of deep recession, what have we seen? That last year, 2020, there were 102 billionaires, and in 2021, they have jumped to 140 billionaires. That is, 32 billionaires have been added in the space of 1 year, and that is a 37% increase in 1 year. This shows the nature of our economy also. The production levels have fallen. Our GDP has fallen. But the profits and the wealth of the big corporates and the super rich has increased tremendously. The obverse side is you have today greater levels of unemployment, both rural and urban. Before the pandemic itself, it was found that the unemployment rate was the highest in 45 years. You have seen new levels of hunger. The global index of hunger placed us 74th in the world, out of 140. and you have malnutrition, and you have, because of this pandemic conditions and the closure of schools, you have now a large scale dropout of children from schools, the growth of trafficking of children and child labor. So, and you have seen how the status of women, the access to employment, to wages, has sharply declined in this period. And the most oppressed section socially, whether they are Dalits or Adivasis, they have borne the brunt of this economic crisis. So the inequalities are economic, not just income and inequalities. The inequalities is sharply aggravated in the access to healthcare, access to education, access to housing, etc., etc. So this is the nature of the capitalist development, which has gone contrary to all the directive principles which I enunciated. That is not surprising, because neoliberal capitalism today is known all over the world to make the rich richer and sharpen the inequalities. This is a worldwide phenomenon wherever neoliberal regimes have come into place. This has led to a threat to the economic inequalities. The sharp inequalities have their reflection, have their deleterious impact on our politics and our social values and norms. What we have been talking about today, about the threats to democracy and democratic rights. Because neoliberalism will lead to definitely the attenuation of democracy. And the role of big capital and big money in our political and electoral system further skews the nature of our democracy. We have only a partial democracy today, or a half democracy. And the combination of this neoliberalism, corporate neoliberalism, with the Hindutva forces, this is a lethal mixture, because the Hindutva forces are inherently authoritarian. So you have political authoritarianism along with this drive for centralization, which affects federalism, which assaults the rights of the states. And the big bourgeoisie of our country, the big corporates, want a highly centralized system which can deliver the goods for them. So this alliance between neoliberal capital and Hindutva authoritarianism today poses the greatest threat to us as India, or a society which has secularism, democracy, and federalism as its basis. So that is why today the question is not just failure to fulfill the ideals or goals of the independence struggle. What we are faced with is a reversal, full reversal of this, a counter revolution. We are saying complete the task of democratic revolution, but there is a counter revolution going against the whole thing. So that is what has to be met. And if we have to prove true to the goals of our freedom struggle, which had the vision or a concept of a modern, secular, democratic India, a federal India, which encompasses all the unity in diversity, it is necessary to fight this authoritarian Hindutva neoliberal regime at all levels and in all spheres, politically, ideologically, the social, cultural sphere, because what they represent, as Comrade Sitaram said, is unreason. They stand for unreason and irrationality. They stand for everything which is inimical to the goals of a modern democratic secular republic. So the fight for India, which will carry forward the ideals of the freedom struggle, that can be done only if we recognize that this fight has to be against both politically and ideologically the Hindutva forces and the neoliberal capitalist system, which has helped, or which has the combination of these two forces have reinforced and helped the counter-revolutionary or reactionary forces in this country. So that is the challenge before us. And on the 75th year, when we enter the 75th year of our independence, we have to resolve that we will wage a relentless struggle against Hindutva, the Hindutva neoliberal regime. That is the resolve with which we must go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Prakash. And now this has brought to us concluding part of this today's discussion that we have organized today about this celebrating India's freedom struggle and identifying challenges today. It means for the Marxists, for us, the leftists, it's not only the question of celebration means pomp and show, and in any way during this pandemic, we can't do that also. But instead of celebrating the event, our purpose was to identify certain issues. Those issues related to our freedom struggle, its tradition, legacy. Our speakers, distinguished speakers, has done justice to that. Identifying the crisis, the problems and challenges, and at present, our task, how to go forward. With Comrade Prakash Karat saying that the question of unity in diversity, and that bring me to this my topic today. United we stand. So throughout the freedom struggle, as Comrade Sitaram in the beginning pointed out, that when the Purna Swaraj issue was raised, a proposal was made in the Ahmedabad Congress. So from that day onward, we wanted to bring in both the Muslims and the Hindus together, not symbolically, but identifying their issues also, the common issues. And that's how communists were able to integrate with the political slogan of freedom with its social and economic content of abolition of landlordism, abolition of reminiscence of feudalism, bring justice to all, ensuring social justice, which Manikda has pointed out, how this social justice, particularly for the Dalits, for the tribals, for the marginalized sections, how their issues can be identified and integrated. And through, as Pinarayi Vijay has said, strengthening the workers' movements, peasants' movements, youth movements, students' movements, various segments of the society were brought in. Because unless they got to understand that, what does freedom means to them? So when food, right to education, right to treatment, right to their households, their housings, all these issues has to be incorporated, and that is how economic justice is to be ensured. But as Prakash Karat said, that now it's a cocktail of this corporate super profit making elements, big bourgeoisie, national and international, in terms of commercial maturing, and together with the political project of Hindutva or this establishing a fascistic state, arousing the passion, religious passion. Now we have to fight both this, and together it's a political project, this cocktail. But to ensure that while uh, making this, identifying these issues and mobilizing people, we have to, unity of our country, we have to preserve. It's not only a question of Hindu Muslims, it's a question of various segments and societies. From Firag Gorakhpuri, Rabindranath Tagore, all these poets, Bharati Subramaniam Bharati, everybody in their poetries, they have made how India was built over the years. Kafla aate gaye, log baste gaye, and Mahamanav Sagar Tire in terms of Rabindranath, how 2 centuries. Now, modern scientific and studies also showing that various segments over the periods, the history have came and settled in India. That's how a pluralistic society is built. So in India, the idea of India means an inclusive society, not a very exclusionary thing. And that is how the fusion of culture. During freedom struggle, that word term can be very popular. Mustahar ka tehzeeb, composite culture. So various states. And now in today's scenario also you see that India has excelled in all those fields where this fusion has taken place. Traditional values, our traditional skills, our traditional wisdom, as well as modern scientific temperament, and milabe and milibe, taking something, assimilating, and developing. So, be it our music, when we talk about Indian music, it's no Puritan thing. We have both South, North, East, West, Northeast combined together. And then Western, Sufi, Karnataka, Carnatic music, our folk, uh, in this ocean, various rivers come and meet. That's why now modern Indian music means it's Punjabi folk or Assamese folk or Bengali folk or any Malayalis or Tamil or Kannada. All these have come together. Not only people, but their practices also. Secondly, food also. When we talk about Indian foods, it's a fusion. You will find it how this has, without elaborating, how it came together. And like music, like this food, fashion, the clothes we wear, the fashion in the fashion technology, be it from Lucknow, be it from Ahmedabad, be it from Bengal, be it from South or Kanchipuram, everything combined together. And that's give us the strength. So we have to preserve this unity of the people. When we stand unitedly, we flourish. So to preserve this plural society, all these challenges, we have to identify and fight together. And this is how, if I remember correctly, when Comrade Sitaram also pointed out, on the eve of this Independence Day, when we go for a positive, the same Prime Minister talk about positivity, he raised the issue of observing this, celebrating intolerance, horrors during partitions, fights. Why? What is the aim? What is the target? To scratch this old wound? That's why we celebrate the unity in diversity, as Comrade Prakash Raj has said that. And for that, the question of now, the idea, in the name of New India, they are placing a very, mutant variant, like COVID-19 thing, coronavirus, that is intolerance, prejudice, hatred, violence, vengeance. These are all antitheses or anathema to our unity. We have to protect ourselves. We have to vaccinate ourselves against this prejudice. It's not only a question of religious minority, be it linguistic minorities. Now, what's happening in Assam and Mizoram in between? Two states police. When we talk about division, there is no end in it. What happened to Dalit activists, minority activists, tribal activists? How they are being threatened, how they are being persecuted, how every day their rights, their freedoms are being curtailed. Whoever is putting this question. this idea of PLU, people like us and people not like us, the creating of these others. So if your language, if your dress, if your practices, if your rituals, if your rights, your beliefs, your food habit is not goes in consonance with those of being practiced by the majority. So this majoritarianism is, instead of ensuring the protection and preservation and conservation of these minorities' rights and practices, they are being challenged. So this challenge we have to accept. And for this reason, be it the question of Sedition Act, UAPA, all these black laws, they're targeting. It's a targeted repression that we have to fight together, uniting these people. This is a big challenge. It's a question of human dignity. I must remember when Nehruvian economic thing was pointed out by Prakash Karat, that reminds me about one writings in Young India in 15 May 1930 by Jawaharlal Nehru. I just quote. He says, diversities cannot be and must not be suppressed, ignored, or bypassed. Otherwise, do so would give rise to resistance, conflict, and ultimately withdrawal from the nation state. That is the very great challenge that we are facing now. So, in that case, with all our minds, ideologically, politically, socially, we have to fight. While the people's issues is to be focused, at the same time, people's unity is to be preserved and protected. And that's a great challenge now. And we have to be united, and united we stand firmly. So with these words, I think we must conclude today's session. I thank all these panelists, all those who are viewers who have logged in, and all those who have helped us technically, because from various parts of this country we have joined in this webinar. And again, my greetings to all of you on the 75th day that we are observing, 75th Independence Day. And we look forward to be in marching unitedly to take on these challenges and fight it back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.